Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little conversation that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video that I'm going to review by the boxing channel known as Dante's Boxing Nation. And I thought that this video was particularly interesting for a multitude of reasons. Number one, this is going to be talking about the future of David Benavidez. It's not going to be a super duper long video. So at most, maybe this video is only going to be about 21 minutes long. But the reason why I thought that I would review this video, once again for a multitude of reasons, is because this isn't just going to be talking about David Benavidez and his skill set and his future, in my opinion, but it's also going to be talking about Dante's Boxing Nation, his agenda. And I've been telling people now for a very, very long time that all Dante's Boxing Nation and a lot of this new media LDBC bullshit, they love to go on their channels and say, oh, David Benavidez is a real one. He's willing to face anybody and, he's a real dog and all this other shit. But once again, they love to put certain fighters on their pound-for-pound list for allegedly being so ducked and so avoided. Where is David Benavidez on their pound-for-pound list? David Benavidez, once upon a time, was a champion. He just beat Caleb Plant. Jamal Charlo has not been willing to face him. Andrade has not really called him out. And Canelo Alvarez, of course, has not seemed the least interested at the moment. So why is David Benavidez not on their pound-for-pound list? Now, one could make the argument, well, at the current moment in time, he doesn't have a belt. And on top of that, he doesn't have the greatest of resumes. One could make that argument, but really the truth is about a certain amount of these channels, and it's not just them. You have to really be careful no matter who you're watching, because 99.9% of the people, they have agendas that are not logical and are not objective. And this is why I always say you cannot trust someone like a Dante's Boxing Nation's analyzations. And this is a big part of the reason why I review some of his videos, because a lot of people, they take a look at my channel and they're like, oh, you're just hating, you're just pocket watching, you're just hating on him, because he tells the truth and blah, 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 and you're just a Canelo Alvarez lover. No, what Dante's Boxing Nation does is that he has a certain amount of agendas that he likes to push depending on the fighters that he likes. And just like what a politician will do, there's certain amount of pawns out there that he will use to try and mud up some of the names that he needs to do to try and tear them down. All these new media people, once again, you notice that they don't have David Benavidez on their top 10 pound-for-pound list. They've never had him there on their top 10 pound-for-pound list. And allegedly one of their criterias is that, they're so avoided that you have to have a fighter that is super avoided. And it's not this guy's fault. We have to have Terrence at number one because, Terrence Crawford is so avoided and blah, blah, blah. And Andrade and Charlo, those were two fighters that once upon a time were on their top 10 pound-for-pound list. Well, David Benavidez has been avoided by Jamal Charlo. There is no doubt about that. At least Jamal Charlo called him out. And then when David Benavidez took that opportunity and said that he was for real, Jamal Charlo backed up like like a dog with his tail in between his legs. And Demetrius Andrade really has not called him out that much either. So one would think, why is David Benavidez not on your top 10 pound-for-pound list? The truth is about David Benavidez with these channels is that they're using him as a pawn. And Dante's Boxing Nation is going to show you his true opinion about David Benavidez and what he really means to him. And you're not supposed to have an emotional attachment to these fighters. I don't really have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is trying to promote a bunch of this false bullshit about certain fighters avoiding and ducking and certain things like that. And, oh, we have to be logical and objective when you're not really about that at all. The only thing that you're really about is your agendas, really about your pro-black agenda and trying to put certain fighters on a pound-for-pound list to make sure that certain fighters don't make it. And don't get me wrong, they're not the only channels that do this. ESPN does this as well, and a lot of other people do this. But like I said, don't sit here and say, all in all, that, oh, we tell the truth here and we do this. No, you don't. It just is what it is. And this is why I review a lot of his videos, because there's no offense against Dante, but a lot of times he's full of shit. It just is what it is. And you're going to see the true opinions about David Benavidez before and after the fight, because what he was saying was that he believes that David Benavidez will get exposed in this fight. So he wants to use David Benavidez once again as a pawn because he knows that he can use David Benavidez's name to throw Canelo Alvarez's name through the mud, because he knows Canelo Alvarez is enemy number one. He knows that Canelo Alvarez is the main threat. But when it comes to Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Boo Andre, David Morrell, he won't mention any of those guys, because all those guys have turned down fights with David Benavidez, or they really haven't been calling him out either. But anyway, so let's talk about it. Let's see what Dante has to say.
Dontaes Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So this past weekend, great fight. David Benavidez, he completely battered Caleb Plant, winning a unanimous decision.
Well, I wouldn't say that he completely battered Caleb Plant, but he clearly won the fight. I think when you say someone completely batters another fighter, you would have to say that they lost, almost every single round. I don't think that that was one of those fights. Now, if you want to say battered in the sense of he clearly got the fight, in a clear way, and of course he was able to hurt Caleb Plant, and obviously he was able to do some damage. You could say that, but the fight was very competitive, and it was more competitive than the Canelo versus Caleb Plant fight.
The fight played out the way the majority of people expected it to play out. You guys heard me tell you leading up to the fight that I leaned towards David Benavidez to win the fight, but I felt even in a losing effort, Caleb Plant, he would make David look very vulnerable while being very dangerous with his equalizer, which is his power. And if you listen to what a lot of the professional boxers...
Well, you know what? Let me say this about David Benavidez once again, because this is just my personal view. People talk about David Benavidez almost as if he's just some guy like an Errol Spence Jr. And I don't think he's like that. Don't get me wrong. He's very powerful. He's got good power. But David Benavidez is not a guy that has A plus power. He's not a guy, in my opinion, that has the same level of power as a Canelo Alvarez or a Dimitri Bivol or an Artur. Once again, you can't take a look always at someone's knockouts and just be like, oh, well, that person has more power because of this, this, and this. That's not how it always works. Like people took a look at Tyson Fury against Deontay Wilder. Now, of course, Tyson Fury doesn't have more power than Deontay Wilder. But people are like, oh, well, Tyson Fury, he has pillow hands. And then all of a sudden he's able to get the knockout. You can't always pay attention to how many knockouts a fighter has. Dimitri Bivol didn't get knockouts for like several fights in a row, and then he went in there and completely bullied around Canelo Alvarez and pretty much a cruiserweight, a damn near a heavyweight, in that fight against Gilberto Zerto Ramirez. So once again, these are just people that, no offense, they really don't know that much about boxing, or they don't know how to break it down to the utmost of degrees. You can't always take a look at something, just for face value and say, oh, well, this person doesn't have as many knockouts, so they just must not have that great of punching power. David Benavidez, he's usually going to get more knockouts because of his style. And on top of that, let's be real, the majority of fighters that he's fighting in the ring are nowhere near on his level and cannot compete with him whatsoever. It just is what it is. And the first mega fight that he ever was in, he failed to get the stoppage. It just is what it is. Now, that is not me criticizing David Benavidez because of Caleb Plant's game plan and because, of course, Kenny Bayless being the referee and known as a referee to split up the action and give breaks quite often in some of his fights. That certainly could have been a deciding factor. But what I will say is this. David Benavidez, his equalizer is not necessarily 100% his power. Now, of course, that's a part of it. His size and, his power is a part of it. But he also has a great gas tank. He's a guy that throws a lot of combinations. He has a high degree of confidence. The question that I have about David Benavidez is that when he finally gets in the ring with a multi-dimensional fighter, a fighter that is able to finally push him back, how well is he going to be able to react? Because Caleb Plant, he tried to push him back here and there, and to a degree he was successful in some of those rounds. But he's also a guy that does not have a good gas tank later on down the line. He doesn't have the power, in my opinion, to really threaten David Benavidez as much as what some other fighters would. And he also doesn't have the boxing IQ and the confidence in some of his punches. Like I said, he's just too defensive of a fighter. And you can't beat someone like a David Benavidez like that. You are eventually going to have to push back. You're going to have to try to bully him back. And if you don't do that, there's a very decent chance that you're going to get battered in the fight.
Have to say about David Benavidez's performance, they seen it the same way. The two undisputed champions, Alicia Baumgardner and Clarissa Shields, they had a brief exchange on Twitter. Alicia said, them chopping punches working. Clarissa, she responded by saying, he just strong, bro. No technique, just everything hurt, bro. Well, the chopping punches, they definitely...
Well, no, it isn't that David Benavidez has no technique. Now, what I will say is this. Is he as multidimensional as a fighter? In my opinion, is what a Canelo Alvarez would be, or someone like a Tyson Fury, or a Terrence Crawford, or a Usyk, or a Spence. No, not necessarily, at least from what we see so far. But like I said, that's really going to be revealed once he gets in the ring with a real multi-dimensional fighter. And when I say a multi-dimensional fighter, I'm talking about Canelo Alvarez. I'm talking about Dimitri Bivol. I'm talking about Artur. Those are the real multi-dimensional fighters that I'm talking about. Because usually that type of style, when you have someone like an Antonio Margarito or a Sebastian Fundora or a Jarrett Hurd, they finally usually end up getting exposed and exposed usually quite badly in a fight when they usually fight someone for the first time that's very multidimensional. Deontay Wilder, George Foreman, whenever they get in that ring finally against that elite boxer, like when George Foreman got in the ring with Ali and when Tyson Fury got in the ring with Wilder, there was one person in my comment section not too long ago, this guy that called me a Canelita lover or whatever it was, and we were talking about it, David Benavidez thing, and he was like, oh, well, who cares, if it looks pretty or not. If it works, then, why fix it? And of course, he was talking about David Benavidez's pressure style. And I agree to a degree. But at the end of the day, the majority of the time, that style has not usually been conducive in terms of winning the biggest matchups of their career. Because oftentimes, when they finally get a fighter that can bully them back, usually 99.9% of the time, they're not that successful. In fact, maybe even 100% of the time, I don't really remember a bully fighter. Maybe Rocky Marciano, but he even was a little bit more technical, I think, than a lot of other bully fighters, when it came down to it. But when you talk about these bully fighters like Antonio Margarito, Sebastian Fundora, Jarrett Hurd, Deontay Wilder, Mike Tyson, even guys that are greatly talented, once that first game plan goes out the window, they're like, shit, what the hell do I do? I don't have intimidation on my side. For those of you that are into the Star Wars universe, for those of you that are into the Star Wars movies, one of my favorite characters of the Star Wars movie was always General Grievous. I grew up watching that throughout my time. Probably my favorite episode of the series, episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Well, for those of you that don't remember, Count Dooku, who of course was a former Jedi turned Sith, he trained General Grievous, and he said, if you don't have intimidation, if you don't have surprise, and if you don't have fear on your side, it's best to retreat. And it's very similar with those type of pressure fighters. They look larger than life, and because of the fear factor and because they constantly go forward and because of their level of power and size, usually they have that fear and intimidation on their side. But once that goes out the window, what really is going to happen? And that's the question that I really have about David Benavidez. What's going to happen once that fear and intimidation goes out the window, and you can really you're in the ring with a fighter that can handle your level of power and size, like a Canelo Alvarez, possibly like a Dimitri Bivol, like an Artur. We'll see what happens. That's going to be really the big revealer of that of David Benavidez.
Definitely worked in his David Benavidez fight. You heard Clarissa Shields said no technique, just everything hurts, which is definitely what makes David Benavidez extremely dangerous no matter who he fights again. Because,
well, David Benavidez has some sort of technique. I just don't know if he's going to have the technique to beat the A+ level fighters. Right now, David Benavidez has proved that, in my view, that he's above the majority of the others. He's certainly above Caleb Plant. He's probably above Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Andrade, in my opinion. At least if we're just talking about in terms of a threat to Canelo, because Canelo, in my opinion, he's the gold standard in terms of fighters around that division. He's higher than Billy Joe Saunders. He's higher than Callum Smith. He's higher than all those guys. And it isn't that he doesn't have technique. Is his technique flawless? No, of course not. But we'll see what ends up happening with Mr. David Benavidez. Like I said, it's going to be very interesting. His feet, of course, are a little bit clunky. Sometimes his head does not always move off the center line, but he has a great gas tank. He has one hell of a game plan, at least the first type of game plan. And I'll say this, he might be the best bully fighter that I've ever seen, at least when you talk about within that Antonio Margarito, Jarrett Hurd, Sean Porter type of style.
he can change the whole complexion of the fight just with one punch. But I truly believe
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, he probably certainly can, depending on the fighter, but he doesn't really come across to me as a Gennady Golovkin type of puncher. He clearly has a great power, but he's not a guy that has A+ power.
after this performance,
Like, if you put him in the ring with Artur, David Benavidez is going to know what true power actually is.
I believe,
And I think that Dimitri Bivol is probably a harder puncher than him as well as Canelo Alvarez.
everyone is going to be in line to fight David Benavidez next, because we already knew going into this fight that Caleb Plant was nowhere near on the level of a Jamal Charlo, a Demetrius Andrade, or a David Morrell. There's no doubt about it.
Let me rewind that. I'm not sure if he was talking about David Benavidez or someone else.
To fight David Benavidez next, because we already knew going into this fight that Caleb Plant was nowhere near on the level of a Jamal Charlo, a Demetrius Andrade, or a David Morrell. There's no.
I wouldn't go that far. I think that's the narrative that Dante loves to throw around because Canelo Alvarez beat him first. Caleb Plant, in terms of his boxing ability, he's certainly above Jamal Charlo. I really don't care what anybody says. All you have to take a look at is the Matt Korobov fight. Jamal Charlo has had so many iffy performances. I just don't think that he's ever really going to stand a chance against true A-plus level fighters. I don't even know if he would beat Caleb Plant right now after 2 losses. I'm not sure if he would beat him. It just is what it is. Jamal Charlo, in my view, no, he's not levels above Caleb Plant. In fact, he's probably a level below Caleb Plant. It just is what it is. In terms of Demetrius Bobo Andrade, you can maybe argue that he's slightly above him because I would say that he maybe has a little bit of a better all-around game just in terms of his offense because sometimes he will be willing to exchange with you. In terms of David Morrell, I can't really comment on him yet because once again, and I think someone politely pointed it out to me the other day that he has like about 8 fights. He needs more experience. And there's a reason why Ronnie Shields, who's his trainer, brilliant trainer, by the way, brilliant boxing trainer, there's a reason why he pointed out that he does not want David Benavidez for David Morrell right now. That was not that long ago. And I understand. I'm not going to call that ducking because you need to build up your fighter, man. Because if you put them in with a monster or someone that, could clearly beat your fighter very early on, someone that has more experience than them, someone that is a great athlete, that could potentially completely fuck their career up. Could completely derail their career.
Doubt about it, having power is dangerous. But having a high boxing IQ, natural athleticism, is even more dangerous. After Tim Tszyu knocked out Tony Harrison, Jamel Charlo, he actually covered the fight. He called the fight. And he gave his thoughts after the fight. And one of the main things he said was, he looked like the same fighter I thought he was even before this fight. Of course, he has power, but don't we all? And the reason he said it that way.
That's a good point, Dante, but that just tells me that you don't know what you're watching. And that's another reason why I like to review Dante's videos. Is no offense against him, but Dante is not the sharpest boxing analyzer. He's not a guy that breaks down fights particularly well. That's why a certain amount of his predictions have been wrong. That's why he doesn't feel comfortable giving a certain amount of predictions a lot of the times because he is wrong in a certain amount of his boxing predictions because he doesn't really know how to break things down, in my view, in the most intelligent way, at least in terms of a boxing breakdown. And once again, that's not me trying to insult the man. I'm glad that he has his own platform. You have the freedom to do whatever you want to do and say whatever you want to say. But there's a reason why I've said in the past, in my view, why he's not the best boxing analyzer. It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. David Benavidez is a guy that lacks technique in certain areas. But I think to say that he just completely lacks technique and that he's just some brawler in terms of, he has no technique, in my opinion, he would have never beat Caleb Plant. Because Caleb Plant has a lot of technique. He has very good feet. He has very good hands. He has very good speed. He has a good jab to the body. There was actually a lot of things that Caleb utilized that were very good in the fight. But David Benavidez, because of his high guard and his ability to cut off the ring and his great stamina and his great counter-punching ability, especially on the inside, he was able to get rid of Caleb Plant in the second half of the fight, or he was able to wear him down.
Is because he does not look at power as the most dangerous weapon a potential opponent can have. But I tell you right now, the way David Benavidez looked in this fight, I'm really looking forward to seeing how he's going to look against, once again, the top dogs, the real top dogs at 168. David Morrell, Jamal Charlo, and Demetrius Andrade. I think this Caleb Plant fight.
Notice, of course, he kept Canelo Alvarez out of that picture. Dante hates Canelo Alvarez's guts so much. But anyway, he just wants Canelo Alvarez to go away so bad. But anyways, listen, what I'll say is this. I don't see Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo really beating David Benavidez. I think David Benavidez probably won the fight around 8 rounds to 4. I just think, to be honest with you, once again, if we're just going to talk about those matchups individually, once again, I can't talk about David Morrell because David Morrell, he's way too inexperienced. I need to see more of a portfolio, more of a resume from him. And he's got to build himself from the ground up. I need to see more from him. As for Jamal Charlo, I don't think Jamal Charlo really has that much of a chance. To be honest with you, and I've already said this, if you put a little tournament in there, if you put Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Jamal Charlo, Demetrius Bubu Andrade, David Morrell, David Benavidez, Jamal Charlo might come in last in that tournament. If he doesn't come in last, he's going to be second or third to last because he's not beating the majority of those fighters. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. I don't see him really beating David Benavidez. I think Benavidez is too big. I think that the type of style that he has, especially, does not work well with the Charlo brothers. The Charlo brothers, in my view, they can handle pressure fighters when they're not fighting intelligently, but they do have a certain amount of problem with pressure. That showed in the Tony Harrison fight and in the Brian Castano fights for that of Jamal Charlo. And for Jamal Charlo, he has a little bit of a problem with pressure here and there. He also has a problem with certain decent boxers. Now, David Benavidez would have to be careful because Jamal Charlo does have good power and he has somewhat of good technique, but I just don't think that he throws enough. I don't think he throws enough combinations. And to really beat David Benavidez, you're either going to have to be a Floyd Mayweather Jr. type of accurate puncher with very good power, which I don't think Jamal Charlo has ever been. A lot of people love to say that Jamal Charlo has a Floyd Mayweather Jr. type of style. I don't really see the comparison whatsoever. I don't think they're really even close. The only thing that's really close about them is that they're two African American fighters. That's really about the only similarity. Like I said, what Jamal Charlo reminds me of is a bigger version of Danny Garcia. That's what he reminds me of. A guy that has very good technique, but a guy that doesn't move his head off the center line or doesn't move his head quite enough. A guy that relies way too much on his counter punching and not throws, doesn't throw enough combinations, blah, 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 and a guy that, at least for Jamal Charlo, sometimes has a little bit of too slow feet.
It just opened up all the doors for David Benavidez.
As for Demetrius Andrade, he might be able to have a chance, but to be quite honest with you, I don't really know if Demetrius Andrade really has a level of power, and I'm not saying that he has bad defense, but is he really going to have the level of defense to keep a light heavyweight off of him like David Benavidez? I don't know. We'll see.
I don't think he's going to have any more problems, once again, getting any of these top guys in the ring. And one of the...
I do. I don't think Jamal Charlo wants to get in the ring with him at all. I don't think Demetrius Andrade is super interested in getting in the ring with him. And Canelo Alvarez right now is focused on in other areas. So we'll see what happens.
Those three guys should definitely...
And David Morrell and his coach have already expressed that they're not interested in getting David Benavidez. So let's see what happens.
His next opponent. And you notice I didn't mention Canelo Alvarez's name because there's no way he's getting in the ring with the Mexican monster.
Yes, I noticed that, Dante, because you hate Canelo Alvarez's guts. But what's interesting, actually, is that Canelo is probably the most likely out of any of those fighters to get in the ring with David Benavidez. Because Demetrius Andrade has barely mentioned David Benavidez's name, and Jamal Charlo has been quiet. He's been quiet like a church mouse overall ever since David Benavidez, has called his ass out.
Benavidez. And that makes me think, if David Benavidez is the Mexican monster, then what is Canelo Alvarez? He is the Mexican what? Y'all can fill in the blanks on that one. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
Dante hates Canelo Alvarez so bad. He almost reminds me of Shannon Sharp whenever Shannon Sharp talks about Michael Jordan and LeBron James. He just hates his guts. But it is what it is. But Canelo is an all-time great fighter, no doubt about it. But the big question will be about Canelo, like I said, is how will his career transpire within the next few years? Of course, he has, that of Dimitri Bivol more than likely to worry about next if he does win the John Ryder fight, which I expect him to, with flying colors. But we'll see what happens. And then after that, if he wins or loses, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with his career. But that David Benavidez fight, that is going to have to be a fight that Canelo Alvarez is going to take, sooner than later. So we'll see. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. And we'll see what happens with Mr. David Benavidez. But like I said, Dante, he doesn't really like David Benavidez. He's just using him as a pawn right now because he still knows that Canelo Alvarez needs to be mainly taken down. So we'll see what happens. And Canelo right now, if he does take another loss, he's certainly going to be much more weakened in terms of his image. So let's see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.